I want to welcome everybody to our webinar this morning. My name is Ernesto Oliveras. I'm the director of the California Violence Prevention Network. And I think, as we mentioned before, we have been meeting post-COVID to have discussions about what we're doing in our communities. And then we had of course, the tragic incident involving George Floyd that changed a lot of our direction. So thus this webinar today, and Jack Calhoun, our president, will fill you in a little bit more on that. But I want to remind all of you that are joining us to please open your chat room and use it throughout our conversation. Here you can post any reactions that you may have as far as what our speakers are saying. Use it to share information going on in your own communities. That could include any links that you may have to programs or efforts that you are doing in your cities as well. And feel free to raise your hand for the question and answer period at any time. I won't be opening that up until noon, but go ahead and raise your hand when you're ready if you have your question. Because once we get to noon, I will be calling you by the order that you've raised your hand. If during that process, somebody asks a question that answers yours, you can obviously lower your hand if you wish. And I'm going to ask you to be brief in your questions. We have a total of I believe 97 people that have registered for this event. So we want to make sure that we get to everyone's questions. So stick to a brief question. If you have comments, post those on the chat room so everybody can see them. I think it would be helpful. And during that Q&A period, I will ask you to identify yourself and your organization. Some of your Zoom applications may have the ability down at the bottom to give a thumbs up or give some reactions or clap. Feel free to do so at any time. As far as any reactions you have to our panelists as well. But we're going to kick it off with Jack making some opening remarks here shortly. Then we'll move into our panel discussion at 11:10, and that'll give us a good 50 minutes of conversation, and then we'll move into our Q&A, and then we'll come back and close things up at 12:25. So Jack, with that, we're right on time, so I'm going to turn it over to you.
Terrific. Thank you, Ernesto, and welcome everybody. When all come in, you're going to be representing 100 of you from 27 different cities and counties across the state of California. You're beautifully represented. This is going to be the first of periodic gatherings of this sort. That is until we bid Corona-19 goodbye, and then we will hold our annual conference statewide in person. Last month, friends, I attended a Black Lives Matter conference virtually. It featured President Obama, the civil rights icon John Lewis, and Brian Stevenson, prize-winning author of Just Mercies. The moderator began in a unique way. He asked each of these icons to describe in one word only, what this meant. What was going on, the civic unrest, the picketing, the clamor for change. Their responses stunned me, stunned. Rather than despair or anguish, they said this: Obama's word, determine. John Lewis, who was almost billy clubbed to death on the Selma Bridge, said, hope. And Stevenson said, inspired. It was amazing. Viewing all on the streets, young, old, male, female, all ethnic as religious groups, the three, Obama, Lewis, and Stevenson, felt that this time, 2020, this time in our history, was qualitatively different, even from the civil rights era, that a new and lasting change was coming, and in some places it had started. It's our purpose today that in addition to conveying some of the pain that accompanies change, the hope, the tangible change that is fermenting and beginning to occur, to look at that, what is going on. We have 4 terrific panelists who will share their thoughts for 50 minutes. They then will answer your questions, as Ernesto has pointed out, for about 30 minutes. As I understand it, you, the audience, will raise your hands, pose your questions, and focus it on a person you want to answer it. We will take your questions again as all the panelists have spoken. I will ask the panelists 4 questions, the first 2 of which are short. And panelists, you certainly are feel free to key off each other. My first question is this: given this tumult, given this upheaval, what gives you hope? And I'm going to turn first to Ana Lopez, Community Impact Division Officer, City of Long Beach Health and Human Services Department, where she oversees the development and sustainability of the city's approach to reduce family and community violence. Her work informs several initiatives: the Youth Strategic Plan, My Brother's Keeper, and the city's Trauma and Resiliency and Informed Initiative. Anna, what gives you hope?
Well, thank you, first of all, for inviting me to be here. It's a great honor to be in this panel. What gives me hope? So I work on a day in, day out with families and youth here in Long Beach and in our region, and it's their resiliency. To understand that in community, there are viable solutions and that people are willing to come together, even in these very difficult moments as we look at the intersection of COVID and social uprising, that people are willing to be uncomfortable, having to have those conversations that are difficult, and find the workable ground to really cause system change. And the reason I say resiliency is because it will take something to actually cause system change. So one word: resiliency.
So in spite of the difficulties with all of this, coming together, you feel a coming together to wrestle with these difficulties.
Correct, yes.
Tom Sveldhelm is currently the mayor of Santa Rosa and former police chief there. In addition, leadership position, he chairs the Santa Rosa Violence Prevention Partnership, chair of the Climate Action Committee, and the Leadership Council. Tom, in this tumult, what's giving you hope?
You know, what gives me hope is the amount of community involvement in this discussion, specifically from the youth of our community. Unfortunately, back in 2017, Santa Rosa experienced a devastating fire. This last weekend in the paper, they talk in my neighborhood, we're 97% of rebuilt, whether in the permit process or the houses are rebuilt. And the only way we're able to achieve that is through everyone coming together, neighbors helping neighbors. And I'm starting to see that now with those conversations, especially from people who typically had not been engaged with the government before. Now people are involved, they're giving us feedback. And like Anna said, we may not want to hear that feedback, but it's the reality, and people are being authentic with truly with the changes that they want to see happen. So really what gives me hope is that we need to keep this momentum moving forward and stay engaged. Doing this together, we can actually make huge progress.
Wow. Quick question, Tom. What is different? Why are neighbors helping neighbors now when you didn't see that as much manifestly as before? What's different?
Quite frankly, sometimes, people with the government, unless something's wrong, they don't get engaged, right? And I'll just use our budget process that Ernesto and I just experienced. We had 12 hours of budget hearings last week before we adopted our budget. That's because we had 190 different speakers giving us input regarding that process. Typical year, maybe we'd have a half dozen. And so I think people see the need for change and they want to be part of that change. They're no longer willing to sit on the sidelines.
Thank you. Mario, long-term colleague and dear friend, he leads the San Jose's Mayor's Gang Prevention Task Force, where he hammers out with schools, faith-based institutions, health departments, the police, and nonprofits, the city's comprehensive plan of action, which he also manages. Mario, what gives you hope in these troubled times?
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity, Jack, to be on this panel with all you great people. And I'm excited to see so many people on this call. I think it is so important that we stay connected and that we continue to have these types of venues, even if all you take away is a granule of information. I mean, the essence is that we stay connected. The tendencies I've seen in a lot of other networks that I'm part of are that COVID has broken and they've fallen apart. And so I really appreciate all the effort of Ernesto and Jack and everyone else to keep this alive. So thank you first and foremost. what gives me hope is everything Tom talked about, community engagement, and obviously the resiliency of our youth. Again, we're talking about youth who have every justifiable, I guess, or plausible reason for giving in to the temptations of a terrible lifestyle. And COVID just could have added to that. And yet every time we engage, whether it's on Zoom or we're doing a drive-by for a graduation, to the smiles on these kids' faces when, you know, things have gone terrible for them. Some of them aren't getting graduation. Some of them aren't being, I mean, it's getting crazy out here in our streets, but every time we're near them, that's the inspiration and hope. They haven't given up, you know. They already had it tough, and this just, along with the social unrest that's happening, I mean, I can't believe I still see smiles on these kids, and it just speaks to how strong life is, you know, and they're gonna make the best out of this. They shouldn't settle for anything. We need to demand change, but I'm happy. I'm happy for them.
What's keeping a smile on their faces, Mario?
I don't know. Maybe it's just blissful youth, youthfulness, you know. They're not paying mortgages. They're, you know, some of those liberating kind of things, but I don't know, Jack. I think they just find the simple joy in life, you know. They can still see it versus some of us more materialistic fools who are worried about the financial things. They're still happy with their friendships, you know. Anyways.
And hopeful for the future. We'll get more into the youth issue in a little bit. Thank you, Mario.
Yeah.
David is the chief of police in Watsonville and has done path-breaking work in the area of immigration. Through dialogue, slow, painstaking trust-building activities, he has, quote, saved 400 immigrants, if I recall correctly, David, from incarceration or deportation because of your police community trust initiative. You have seen reporting crime rise and crime drop. Chief, are we deluding ourselves, or do you see hope in all of this?
Well, first of all, thank you everyone for allowing me to speak on this panel. I think it's very important, like the others have said, that we come together and discuss these things, but also keep that momentum going, as Tom said. We can't let the social unrest that we've seen go to the wayside, because this has been building up for decades. And if we don't address it, it's going to happen again, and it's going to be worse. So yes, what gives me hope is I've always been a man of faith, faith in my God, but also faith in people. I've always been a very positive person, that kind of glass half full type of person. And I always believe that you can't have meaningful change without disruption, without turbulence. I mean, that creates opportunity for us, and we have to capitalize on that. So I think through all this tumult, as you'd said, is an opportunity for make some significant changes, things that have been long overdue. I really believe in people and in the community. For example, when we had the whole thing in Minneapolis just blew up, it was just so disturbing. But I saw our community, we had protests too, but we all came together. We were part of the protests as a city and as a police department.
You were part of the protests?
Well, so we went there to represent our community and community leaders. And I have to admit, it was very uncomfortable being the only one in uniform in the middle of hundreds of people with signs. And some people were chanting anti-police statements. But the overall community, I mean, I think they were there for the right reasons, and they really wanted answers. They wanted solutions. They weren't there to bash us as far as the law enforcement community. They were there to come together for solutions, and it remained peaceful for 3 weeks. So that gives me a lot of hope, knowing that the work we've done in the community was able to keep things in a progressive manner, if that makes sense. So yes, I do have a lot of hope. I believe in this community. I believe that what we do in this community can spread statewide and not only that, nationwide.
Thank you, David. It's interesting, your thesis that real hope may be preceded by cataclysmic change, and some cataclysmic events. We'll double back and go back up the line, starting with you, David, on the second question. It's not easy being a public servant today. People are frightened. You, as public servants, can never do enough. You're often criticized. You're often seen as at fault or falling short. What gives you the strength to keep going, to keep at it? And again, we'll reverse the direction. I'll start with you, David, although I think you've already implied it in your part of your answer in your first question. But what gives you strength to keep going? These are tough times.
So yeah, it kind of goes on to my first answer is being a man of faith. I really believe in people and what we can do together. So just the fact that the work we've done over the last few years, I mean, I didn't get into public service because it was easy. I didn't anticipate it to be easy, but I really believe in coming together and working through problems. It's just something I've always done. I studied it in school and put it to practice here as a chief of police. So that gives me strength, but what also gives me strength is the relationships that we've built over the last several years with our community, but specifically our nonprofits and our faith-based organizations. Because really, as a police department, if you remain so single-minded and saying that you're an organization that just enforces the law and this is the way it is, you're going to fail. You really have to work together with your community, and we have such a great working relationship with our local organizations like Pajaro Valley Prevention and Student Assistance. We focus on diverting youth out of the criminal justice system, and I can talk more about that later. Very important, Community Action Board, where we work really closely with our immigrant population and our farm workers. United Way in Santa Cruz does a phenomenal job of bringing us together to create platforms where we do dialogue with our community members, and not just community as a whole, but a lot of our community members that are caught up in the criminal justice system, but also that are maybe less fortunate. And I think coming to the table as a police department and working with our community groups really is the only way to go. And without that, again, I think you're going to fail as a police department. But since we have that, I really believe that seeing what we've done and seeing the potential moving forward gives me a lot of strength to keep going.
Thank you, David. Working together, faith. You came into this job because it wasn't easy, and the relationships you've built over time. Mario, what gives you strength for this tough work?
Yeah, Jack, I'd have to say it's a combination of two things. For me personally, it's the realization that the need is still there. You know, the struggle still continues. The work isn't done, Jack. And that very struggle that I continue to see our young men and women, you know, maneuver through this gauntlet of society to try to scrape what they can get proves to me that the work is far from being done. I mean, I love everything we talk about here and the way we pat ourselves on the back at times, and we need to encourage ourselves to continue doing the hard work. But the struggle itself is what gives me strength. You know, the work isn't done. It ain't time to be weak. We need to continue fighting. There's people depending on us. And when I combine that with stubbornness and this instillment of values like of respect and fairness that my parents gave me, and again, a healthy dosage of stubbornness, you know, to insist upon change, to continue to fight.
A healthy dose of what, Mario?
Something that you have a lot of, Jack, stubbornness.
Thank you.
All right.
I should have asked that question. Good stuff. Tom, what is sustaining you through this?
Just had to say, Mario stubborn? No, say it ain't so. You know, for me, it's one of the reasons several decades ago, I won't say how many, when I decided to go into law enforcement, part of the reason was I wanted to make a difference. And that hasn't changed. Even once I retired from law enforcement, I think I still had more to give. And that was the basis. It wasn't, you know, and those of you know how much city council members in Santa Rosa get paid. It's not for the money. You know, you still want to make that difference. And early in my tenure on the council, I really dove into our homelessness situation here. And I was referred a book by Simon Sinek on Start With Why. Why do you do this? If you're starting to work with individuals experiencing homelessness, you're going to get a lot of pushback, and it's very difficult to make anyone happy. And if you don't understand what's your why, it helps guide you. And so for me, understanding why I'm doing this, I'm not looking at this as a stepping stone for anything else. I just want to do what's best for my community. I hope with my experiences that I can still add value to our city. And one of the things where it's been tough, I'll be honest with you, the last couple of days where, and I'm sure every city's been experiencing this, is the city council making any correct decisions? Because man, there's criticism, and no matter what you do, you're frustrating someone. And so if you don't know the reasons why you're doing that, and so for me, one of the bright spots the last couple of days, we have our Santa Rosa Violence Prevention Partnership, and Jason Carter, who I think is also on the line, shares the same thought with us. Let's bring people together. Let's get us updated what's going on. So having had a series of negative meetings, early Wednesday, one Wednesday morning at 8 o'clock, we had 50 folks there, all working together to help reduce violence in the city of Santa Rosa, from elected officials to school districts to nonprofit partners. And it was really inspiring for all of us coming together. It's like, holy smokes, here's 50 folks. And this isn't just the first time. These have been relationships that have been formed over the years. Man, we can make change here because we're on this together. No one's pointing a finger at anyone else. We're in this thing together. And that's that spirit that really gives me strength. It buoys you after you've had some tough days, questioning, why am I here? And then you have that magical moment, 50 people on the same page trying to make a positive change in your community. All right, I'm all in.
You are sustained then by them.
Absolutely.
Beautiful. Anna, what is sustaining you?
On a personal level, primarily it's my faith. I really do think that I'm very blessed to do the work that I do. You know, I feel like it's not a job. It's really a calling to really be in a space that creates opportunity for dialogue, conversation, and bridging different departments together around violence prevention. So a lot of our work really looks at how do we work across from a health department with PD, development services, parks, libraries, and also across the state. So personally, I enjoy what I do. It is challenging, and there are moments that, you know, a lot of gray hair. But I think it's a calling. It's really something that drives me from a community perspective. Long Beach is an amazing city, and I don't say that lightly because I've worked in other cities. But when I've placed out a call for support around initiatives, people show up. And I think that when we create opportunities for collaboratives, conversations to happen organically and authentically, and when I say that, there are very uncomfortable moments that are gonna happen. People do show up, and around our violence prevention work, when we look at our Safe Long Beach effort in the community, we have system level or people showing up, community residents showing up, and they're having dialogues within their neighborhoods, and then systemically having those same conversations to figure out how do we align them, how do we align different departments to work collaboratively. That's what sustains me, that people are said, okay, if we're gonna create a common vision, collective impact model, then let's do this, and let's have some real deep conversations around what has to happen within ourselves personally, what drives us to our work here, and also community level, how we engage in community, and then systemically, how we aligning systems to really cause that change. And Long Beach is really actively engaged in those conversations.
Well, as usual, you're giving the credit away because a lot of people call and a lot of people who are called don't come. You're pretty compelling and you feel the calling, and you must communicate that. I mean, I feel it when I'm with you also. There's part of me, quite honestly, to just deviate from the moderator role, that sometimes I'd like the calling to stop because I'm about 108 years old. But I have to confess that A, it sustains me, the work, and B, probably my wife likes it a lot that I'm busy. So Anna, we'll stick with you and go back up. And now this is the opportunity to go a little deeper. A few weeks earlier, we spoke of the entire staff, if I got it right. I'm not sure I got it right. All of Long Beach City employees to committing to reconciliation. Check me if I heard that right. And that you yourself, immediately after these crises have begun to mobilize youth as part of the solution. Tell us about both of these.
Yeah, I'm happy. So like many cities, we experienced some uprising on a Sunday evening, particularly. And in the days that followed, our city manager, Tom Modica, issued out a email, and it was called Join Me. And it was an effort to really call upon city staff and city to really look at what reconciliation would look like here in the city of Long Beach. And he invited staff to come out of their own accord. It was optional to make a presence around what the city is really about. And we are here to find avenues to improve our relationships with the community. We do recognize that it hasn't always been as transparent. And now he set forth that email and also called upon city staff to take a stand. Over 1,000 of our staff showed up.
1,000?
Yes, nearly 1,000 staff members showed up. And it was a way for the city to stand in solidarity of saying, like, this is our city. Because many people actually showed up after some of the incidents that happened in our city to paint, to clean. And we said, okay, we know we're not doing things well, then let's take on what it's gonna look like. And since then, there is a newly appointed position now within our city manager. We actually have a deputy, Teresa Chandler, who oversees violence prevention, youth planning, youth development, and homelessness. And under her is a reconciliation effort. So we are looking at issues like racial equity among ourselves as staff. How are we supporting that? These are tough conversations. They're just starting off. We are trying to put our work groups together. So please know that this is something that's brand new. And at the same time, we are developing this youth strategic plan. And my colleague and I, Eli Romero, said we can't really move forward in developing a strategic plan absent of having a conversation around what's happening today, meaning dealing with COVID and dealing with social uprising. And we developed a 3-part youth town hall series. It's linked into our My Brother's Keeper initiative. And the intent of the outcomes are threefold. The first one is really just happened last week. It was titled Youth Voices at the Intersection of COVID and Social Uprising. And it's really to ask our Youth Advisory Committee and our community members who are, youth and emerging adults, what were some of their ideas and strategies that we need to take on? And that forum was developed with our youth ambassadors, the questions, the design of it, so they owned it. Very successful, and I could say that they spoke very clearly to items like defunding police. So when we asked them that, I said, well, what does it look like? And what came out of it, what things like, what type of trainings our police officers could have. They talked about trust building relationships. They talked about what it would look like to have a stronger partnership with PD. So all of a sudden we see what that definition of what it would look like when people call out things like defunding, which is really community policing and closer partnerships and trainings and more resources towards youth development. So the first one, the second one is actually going to be facilitated by the youth, but it's going to be about sustainability reform. And the third one is looking at the release of our plan. And the reason I bring that to the forefront is because youth have been really guiding this whole process, and they are leaders of today. We call them leaders of tomorrow, but they're the ones who are really taking the action today to undertake this work. And they had really great, very clear ideas of what they wanted to do. And then more at the community level through our Safe Long Beach work, we're doing place-based efforts in our high impact communities. And I credit the city departments that are showing up to have these conversations with residents around community engagement. So we work at the city level as a structure internally to look at racial equity issues among ourselves and having those conversations around racial healing. We're looking at youth engagement and what that means as they coin what are some of the strategies that they want to see as this all evolves. And then at the community level is around community engagement and those partnerships with community to really look at what violence prevention would look like on the ground.
Maybe you could, so powerful. Two quick questions and we're going to move to Tom. One is, give me a visual of this 1,000 staff. You were all out there. Were you in a park? Were you in?
No, it's actually, sorry, go ahead.
It was in a park. So were you, and press was there. The press.
So it was in front of our city hall. We have a new city hall that has an open platform. A foyer big area. So was there. And
wow.
it was optional for staff to show up. So it was just support. The city was taking a stand in support of what reconciliation would look like. And as I said, we're in the process of developing what that will look like, but part of it is this internal piece looking at racial equity. It's being led out of our Office of Equity.
Well, Stevenson said, I want people to confess or fess up, but I don't want them published after that. I want action. And he said it much more elegantly than that. And maybe when we come back in the discussion period, that line between people gathering angry and how you transmuted that from anger to activity, to involvement. Or if you could, go ahead.
We're feeling the anger. We are doing, I believe it's like close to 20 listening sessions. But I think we need to listen to that.
Yeah.
We need to actually listen to it, because in the midst of all of that tumult, also is the opportunity to see what are the strategies and efforts that we need to undertake. So it does take us time to really recognize what we have not done well and listen to that, and then move into a space that allows us then to heal, and then come into a space of, this is what we're actually able to do together. So it has not been, we're currently in the midst of it, and it is a difficult space to be in as a city entity, but we're taking it on.
To having the guts to really listen, honestly listen, and to face the anger is part of it.
Yes.
Is part of it. Tom, listening, you mentioned the other day when we talked, an intensive listening strategy, if I got you right. So I would ask, what are you hearing, and what policy or program changes are you beginning to implement or are percolating at this point? But the first question is, parse a little bit about listening, because that's hard.
So for me, actually, I appreciate the feedback. And those that know me, when I was chief, I said one of my expectations was feedback is a gift. And so to put yourself in a position where people are willing to give you authentic feedback really is a gift. And so shortly after the murder of George Floyd, hearing from actually youth, the chief and I first heard some youth, and it was interesting from their perspective. They had all this energy and anger, but they weren't sure how to channel it. So one of the things we suggested, okay, have you read or heard about the 8 is enough? Some policies and practices that police departments around the country, the study shows that if you were to incorporate these 8 policies, you'd see a 72% reduction in police deaths. And they thought they'd never heard of that. I go, so if you're looking for something, take a look at that, because there's still that energy there. Shortly thereafter, the chief and I met with, at their invitation, representatives from the NAACP at a local Baptist church here. And I reached out to Ruben, who is the local Sonoma County chapter president, and say, let's have this discussion. And what was wonderful about that, there's probably a dozen or so, 15 maybe, folks just sharing their impact about policing in Santa Rosa. right? Policing in Santa Rosa. So again, having been a former officer, I'd like to think that I never demonstrated any of those unlawful, illegal behaviors, but just the impact of the uniform that has on some community members and what goes on in their communities was fascinating to hear for. I mean, it was emotional. There was no holds barred. And Chief Navarro and I, we just listened. And it was fascinating because one of the young ladies in the meeting, she said, so what are you guys going to do? You know, this isn't a one and done listening session. I need to continue to listen. I don't have the strategy down because I'm not sure. And when I said to them, if you were the chief of police or if you were the mayor of the city of Santa Rosa, what would you do next? I need to get a lot more information, but it's very clear to me that there are some members of our community have a lack of trust or do not trust the police department. I want to work, okay, what do we need to do so that you would trust your local law enforcement? What does that look like? And again, that's not just one meeting, that's going to be several meetings. So we've already scheduled another meeting later on this week on, I believe it's Thursday, July 2nd. We're going to be doing a joint march from City Hall to downtown Courthouse Square, the heart of our city. The city of Santa Rosa is sponsoring it with the NAACP. We're in this together. We need to have the conversation. Additionally, later on, we've had some unfortunate demonstrations that some members turned to acts of violence and some graffiti. Well, we listened. Again, it was just that Chief Navarro, myself, and a Board of Supervisor representative, we were at a meeting arranged by the Human Rights Commission. And these were people and family members who had been struck by police projectiles, had been arrested that evening. So we're hearing from them the impact of that incident and those couple nights of unrest had on their partnering with us in the community and the challenges that's going to bring. But we're just listening because you need to hear it from their perspective, have the empathy of understanding what it's like. Because I've never been arrested, but I'm hearing what their real situation, what they truly felt. Okay, where do we go from here? And again, that's another example. That was just one listening session. That's what we did, listen. We're not done. How do we move that listening to change and make that change that's going to benefit all of us? It's going to be a long process, Jack. It's not one and done.
Mm-hmm. It's really commendable, Tom. I mean, as opposed to a one and done. Okay, we've heard you. Goodbye. You're saying we're going to meet. We're going to go through it. We're going to listen to the hard stuff. We're going to get back to you candidly. We will keep getting back and back and back till we get it right. Is that part of what you're saying?
Absolutely. And having had some background experience and training in changing culture, culture does not change overnight. There's a series of very strategic steps because if you try to go too fast, it's going to be resisted. But if you start getting the key people in the right positions, do that incremental change, we can do that. But again, it's not going to happen overnight. We need to engage the members of the community that want to see that change and let's work together. I don't want anyone feeling this is being done to them. It's being done with them because I don't have that perfect vision about where do we want to end up. But that's the part of the conversation I'm interested in having now with community members. Okay, what does that perfect community look like? And then how can I help you and help us get there?
And what was the purpose, Tom, of your march? That seems very dramatic. Was that more the optics of that we're in it together as a city and youth, or give me a little more
flesh? So Mark, it is yet to occur yet. It's happening this week. I believe it's on Thursday. That's July 2nd. It's to show that we're not pointing fingers. There's no way we're going to make the effective change in the community unless we're doing this together. Again, going back to our fire recovery. If we started pointing fingers, well, how come FEMA's not doing this? Why didn't this happen or that happen? No. How do we collectively work to affect the change? That's, in my opinion, that's the only way this is going to work. We all have to do this together. And that will be very symbolic. We've never done a joint march with our brothers and sisters in the NAACP. We need to do it together. That's how we're going to affect change.
Fantastic. Mario, what have the recent events done to your comprehensive citywide plan and policies to reduce violence and build healthy neighborhoods? How has this changed your mandate and what you're doing? What are you seeing?
Wow, that's a tough one, Jack, but I'd start by saying that I think across this state, this fallacy that our youth have slowed down needs to be, rectified. Unlike our youth in San Jose who didn't miss a beat, who really haven't slowed down, this COVID pandemic has really slowed us down, Jack, as a municipality and as a response mechanism. and quite honestly, as a much needed safety net. Our youth, unfortunately, haven't changed their behaviors completely, and the needs are still there. And what that's created in communities like ours in San Jose, I believe, to some degree, is an unbalance. These marginalized individuals still are having engagement with PD at the same levels. Unfortunately, that balance of wraparound services and the resources we bring as youth intervention services or our community-based organizations, due to the social distancing, due to the shelter in place, hasn't been there to kind of balance our comprehensive approach. I understand that suppression and enforcement has to happen in certain situations, but when that can't be balanced by the work we do, the touch points, the high touch points, showing these individuals how much we care and building the strong relationships that I think is what we base our work here in San Jose on. The big change is we're not using words like evidence-based anymore. It's getting back to the heart of this, and working from the heart. There's nothing wrong from that. We know what we need to do for each other. We need to reach out and support each other, but I'm not sure that's an evidence-based approach. That aside, it really has slowed us down and shifted us. Both the community-based organization and city staff have really shifted to things like mass food distribution and sheltering needs for our homeless. And so unfortunately, the very staff that used to do intervention work, both in our community-based organizations and within the city, due to this pandemic, have been shifted to other essential duties. And I think that has, again, added to that unbalance and the fact that it slowed us down. This work and being effective in creating change with our youth isn't a formula. It truly, and I say isn't evidence-based. It's about relationships and genuine relationships. So
Then you
really
ask,
slowed us down.
yeah, and how do you forge a relationship when you've got to keep social distancing? I know you guys pioneered the violence interrupters work, and their evening work, their night work, 2 a.m., getting between in the middle of the stuff. And that, I know, helped stop a lot of stuff. And you're saying that's jeopardized at this point?
Absolutely.
How do you form a relationship, a key relationship with an untrusting person if you can't be with them?
Yeah, these mandates of public health and social distancing mean that we're no longer having the opportunities to nourish those relationships. We're not doing the home visits. We're not doing the one-on-one pickups. We're not doing the large group activities that allow us or grant us the license to operate amongst these young men and women. It's important. Again, I think the saving grace here in San Jose and in many of our cities is if you've been doing real work prior to COVID, and I'm talking about building real relationships with these young men and women, you had something to anchor on in these times of distance. Those cities that were going through the motions and those programs that were superficially contacting their youth without building relationships, treating them as another case, as another serial number, are probably struggling tremendously now because they never started the work with true relationships. I think that's our silver lining, is that pre-COVID, we had really nourished our relationship with our most needed youth and our biggest sets here in San Jose. And that has allowed us to now still have some rapport, still have some control, still have some influence on our city's safety. And, we've really had to rely on things like constant phone calls. We've had to do things like creative Zoom calls with the homies,
But you were saying though that that's based on a precedent relationship.
Absolutely.
So you could call up Jack and say, how's it going? I can't see you. because of social distancing. How'd you do in the last exam? So what you're talking about is using to the maximum extent possible the relationships that have been developed before. Is that right?
The importance of relationships, COVID aside, are paramount. I think in all our work, I think we need to get away from recipes and of ways to change youth. I mean, it really is about an individualistic approach and getting to know each individual and building these relationships pays dividends. I mean, now because we have real relationships, we're able to reach out to our youth and stay in contact and continue to support them with basic needs like getting their driver's license or getting a job, or where they can find food for their entire family, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think that if we had that pre-COVID, that we could all of a sudden fall out of the sky and impress upon them that we truly care. That sense of true relationship and caring had to have existed pre-COVID to be able to. So I guess my long-windedness in all of this is that, yeah, it has impacted us, because as municipalities and as CBOs, we are under those guidelines of social distancing. I'm glad to say that they are relaxing a bit. On the same note, I'm a bit concerned about the uptick of cases in our state. It is a reality. As anxious as I am and our interventionists are to get back to work, the last thing we want to do is hurt our families and youth. So we're kind of in a gray area, Jack. We haven't figured it out, but we're going to continue to work from the heart, and we're going to stay connected to our youth and hope that at the end of it all.
There may be a phrase that's neither clinical nor textbook, but it is what you're trying to do is, quote, and the soul felt its worth. That's what you're trying to do with these kids. And the soul felt its worth. Chief, you've done stunning work in Watsonville with the county's immigrant community. You have gotten to trust. Tell us a little bit how you did that, and whether recent events have altered this plan. And it also may be a segue to Mario because of the distancing. How do you do that with the social distancing?
Well, to answer your first question, how do we do that? It's all about partnerships with community organizations. We had a need and we wanted to fill it. So we worked with our community action board to actually go out in the field and develop relationships with our migrant workers in the field, because they're working from the break of dawn till late at night. They don't have the opportunity to come to our community meetings at night or on the weekends to find out what resources the city has for them or what other resources are available through nonprofit organizations. So it was really just being intentional. We have one of my captains here actually grew up in the fields, and he was a witness to some of the abuses that were out there back way back when it was not ICE, but it was INS, and even the local police worked with them. And there's some things that as a profession, I would say we're not proud of, stuff that should never have happened. And so having that history and having that knowledge, he was able to come up with this idea of going out there and building these relationships and getting resources out in the field where they have access to these resources. And we actually partnered with the Mexican Council, actually found out, and we've been partnering with them as well to bring other resources out to our migrant.
So you went to them. It wasn't come down to the precinct or come down to City Hall. You went to them.
No, because you have to look at what needs are in your community. And a lot of people don't have the opportunity or don't have the trust, or there's a fear of the police department to come down to the station or come down to City Hall, especially if you want to come get resources from the city 9 to 5 and you don't get off of work till 7, 8 at night. I mean, really, what opportunity is there for you? So we wanted to go out and take resources out to our community. So that's kind of how it started. The other part is dealing with our youth. So it all started with our Youth Violence Prevention Network. How do we engage with our community, with our youth that are highest at risk or already involved in gangs? And so that was part of it. How do we address it as a family? But we also have our youth violence or our youth dialogues, which I think is very important too, where officers go out and they just listen to our youth and their families. And it's difficult because the officers go out and they get it from all very very negative at first, but what it does, it brings people together so you can actually discuss how things can get better. And I think that's a great relationship. So talking about how COVID has affected that, COVID really put a stop in a lot of our programs just because the shelter in place, we couldn't go out, we couldn't meet with people. The farmers didn't want us to come out in the field just because of the potential for spreading the virus. We can't have our restorative circles because of the COVID. So it's been a challenge, but we would have no plans to give up. We have plans to keep moving forward and actually expand these programs. But I do want to address a question that came up earlier, because I know we're running out of time and we're not having time to address a lot of questions. So there's a question that came up earlier, if you don't mind me answering a question, Jack.
Go ahead, make it quick.
So one of the questions was, so many communities are dealing with drastic cuts to their budget. It says, how does the WPD only facing 5% cuts, whereas other city departments are having 40% cuts? The whole budget process is very convoluted. 5% seems like a lot less, but since we're the biggest drain on the city budget, so to speak, that I am actually losing an entire team of staff. So that really affects us. And one of the problems we have is, since as a police department, when we see a void, like some of our youth diversion programs, when it's not getting addressed, we take it upon ourselves to create programs to work with our PVPSA and our school districts to keep youth out of the juvenile justice system. So we create these programs and they cost money. So I don't disagree with people saying, well, the police, if we took money away from the police department, since we're so expensive, and put them towards youth programs, I don't disagree with that. But because of the COVID, budget cuts are happening everywhere, and there's no structure in place to just switch our youth from these programs to another program. So if we ended up cutting even more, the only people that lose out are really our youth. So until there's a structure in place, a better way to do it, if we just cut right now, what happens to that cut? The money that we save cutting the police department and other departments, what happens to that? With the budget cuts going across city, county, and statewide, that money is just going to dry up and disappear, and it's not going to go anywhere. So in the short term, it's to save our programs. In the long term, I think there's a lot of room for discussion and how we move forward. And as a community, we're actually coming together right now to develop a community engagement committee that will help dictate where the money is going to be distributed going forward as for the city budget. Wow. So I think there's a lot of changes coming in the future, but in the short term, it wouldn't have helped.
But it sounds like one thing you're saying with that is you're not alone in this. It's not you fighting, but you have a community that's there. Yeah. So we got about 5 minutes left for the last question. And David, you're on to start this. We can keep the answers brief.
Okay, sorry.
Each of you is in the midst of change or the beginning of change. No matter, you're in it. Mm-hmm. What gives you the sense that these changes will stick? Or is this just going to be a passing phenomenon? Dramatic, traumatic, people in the streets, people protesting, but partnerships developing. What gives you the sense, or does it, that this is qualitatively different and there will be changes as opposed to a passing phenomenon? So we start with you, David, and go back up.
Well, so I think it's going to stick because a lot of the work that is being pushed out there, we've already started as far as policies. We've changed our policies before this even happened. Granted, there's a lot more changes we need to do and implement, but the state of California has actually implemented laws just this past year that is addressing some of those issues with regards to such issues like use of force. Those are just started. So I think we've already started the process. And I think the unrest has just given us more momentum to get those done a little faster. And in regards to specifically Watsonville, we're already moving ahead with developing a group for not only police oversight, but also city oversight with regards to what does our community want for our city budget and how it's going to get distributed and what other programs can we invest in so we don't have to invest so heavily in law enforcement, but also in diversion, intervention, and developing our program. And we're talking not only gangs, and our youth, but also our health, our mental health, and our homeless population and stuff like that, other social issues. So I think those changes are here to stay, and more changes are coming.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like part of what you're saying is you're not alone in this, and it's
No,
broader,
you
and it's
can't-
looking at some
can't do it
people.
alone. You can't do it alone. And since other people are involved, we're going to hold each other accountable for making changes happen and progressing.
Mario, are these changes going to stick, or is this ephemeral? Is this passing?
Jack, I'm not Nostradamus, man. But I'm hopeful. You know, hope matters, as you constantly tell me, Jack. But I got to believe that some of this change will stick, and that again, with a healthy dosage of stubbornness and not letting things slide right back to the old normalcy, that some of this could. We're all going to have to meet. We're all going to have to be in this together. I mean, that's the common thread I keep hearing here. And I don't know, Jack. I don't know. I've been hurt too many times and let down so many freaking times that I want to be unequivocally optimistic that the changes will stick and hold, and that we'll see them through, and not just talk about change, because I still haven't seen it. I mean, we're sitting here as if change has happened, and shit, it's far from there. And so, will they stick? I don't know. They haven't even gotten there. You know, change has barely started, Jack. So I'm first wanting to see the change happen, and then we'll worry about it sticking. But shit, let's make it happen first.
All right. Okay, Tom, what will make some of this adhere, some of these changes, and that it won't be ephemeral?
So some of the strategies that I've done since COVID-19, all the mayors of Sonoma County have been meeting once a week to talk about what's going on in your town, what's going on in your town. And Santa Rosa is, the largest city in Sonoma County, about 3 times larger than others, but we have the shared understanding, shared knowledge. So early on, I had taken the My Brother's Keepers Alliance pledge, and I reached out to the other mayors. Hey, how many of you have taken it, and would you be willing to stand with me together to say we're in this together? Because all the unrest that we're dealing with, it's not just a Santa Rosa issue. For us, it's more of a regional issue. So why don't we tackle this as a regional issue? And to my knowledge, that's never really happened before to this nature. So when we had a press conference, we had kind of going on with what Mario said. We got to hold each other accountable. We had our congressman there. We had every mayor there, every chief of police there. The sheriff was there, the chair of the supervisors, and invited Ruben, who is the current president of the NAACP, to stand with us. And we said it, this is what we stand for. And all of us are right now in step 2 of that, My Brother's Keepers pledge. 8 can't wait. It's like, let's engage in your community. So there's going to be shared learning. And all of the mayors, we're talking about, okay, because what I do in Santa Rosa is going to be different than what they do up north in Cloverdale or down south in Petaluma. But it's going to be that shared understanding. And Jack, for me, that has never happened before, where all of us are talking together. We're not in these little isolated 9 different fiefdoms where each little city is doing its own little thing. Why don't we share with that and learn what those best practices are? So I'm very optimistic. Will nothing happen of this? Well, it will if we choose to allow that, but I'm choosing to make a difference here, and I think everyone's on board with that. So we just got to keep that momentum moving forward. Because again, now I just talked about it, my earlier comments about we're in this together in the city of Santa Rosa. Well, Sonoma County, all the leaders, all the chiefs, we're in this together. So let's find best practices to actually make that difference.
In it together. Beautiful. Tom. Anna, what's going to make this adhere, stick, the changes? I think you're muted.
There we go. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So here in Long Beach, really what we've been looking, like I mentioned, really looking at the reconciliation plan, looking at how we listen to people, taking those uncomfortable moments in, looking at our city structure. We do have structures in place. Like I mentioned, we now have a deputy city manager that's looking at violence prevention, youth development, and homelessness. So looking at ourselves systemically and what we're doing. But I think ultimately what's going to sustain this work is the people. It's us. Government is about people. And I remember when we here in Long Beach faced a night of just vandalism and fires and everything that was taking place, I sat down on my bed and I read the letter of Birmingham. from Martin Luther King. And I encourage everyone to read it, because in the midst of this deep moment for him, he was, I'm gonna use the word prophetic in the way he spoke about the future. And it's the coming together of very diverse perspectives, finding those workable grounds, learning to be unreasonable to lead to being reasonable. But it's in that diversity, in the voices of all those folks that are coming together. And that's what I see different, that it's our vast coalition of people that are coming together that are going to sustain this work. And you have to have heart for it. This is not just the data driven, because we could die ourselves out of data. Data is important. It should be data driven decision making, but our hearts are what going to sustain this work, that we're committed to it for the long run.
Wow. Wow. Beautiful. Couldn't think of a better benediction. We're going to move to questions after I quote this, because you inspired this. We want to irrigate the community with hope, because without hope, we're literally hopeless creatures of despair. I'll quote the French philosopher Teilhard de Chardin. The world belongs tomorrow to those who brought the greatest hope. And each one of you, in your own ways, have talked about that hope and continuing that hope, even while you're listening to the hard stuff, even while you're admitting your mistakes, even as you bring in new partners. So this combination of heart, of listening, and what courage it takes to listen, and the structures that are slowly developing around that, various commissions or committee, or Tom, your group of mayors are learning and holding each other accountable. We're a little bit over time, but it's time for some questions. So I give it back to you, Ernesto, to handle questions from the field. So you're on.
Thank you, Jack. We don't have a lot of questions. We have a couple right now. So I will say this, is that if you want to also add comments, you're welcome to raise your hand as well, and we can hear your comments or anything else you want to share with us. But first, I want to hear from Ted Black. Ted, I'm unmuting you so that you can speak. So please do so. And Ted, for some reason, it shows that you're using an older version of Zoom. So I'm going to promote you to a panelist so you can ask your question.
It's an unpaid job, but you're on, Ted Black. Go for it.
So, Ted. You're muted, Ted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. Hey, how everybody doing?
We're doing better for hearing your question. Fire away.
Okay. No, I didn't have no questions. I just have comments.
All right.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank you guys for doing what you're doing right now. And I think it's important that, one, that we live up to the name of networking, because that's the only way we're going to be able to solve these problems, is we all got to be on one accord. I really appreciate what the mayor said about Santa Rosa, connecting with other communities to be able to be on one accord, because right now, me being on the front line still, dealing with youth, understanding the at-risk youth that are out there, that are not practicing social distancing, that are still very active in the streets, it becomes a real challenge. Mm-hmm. And, making sure that we're giving them the right tools so that they can be instrumental in their everyday path. Because, and when I say that, I mean, a lot of these youngsters don't understand all of the political hype that's going on around them. They don't understand it. And so when they get up and they go outside, it's a normal day to them. But because everybody else is kind of stagnant and not moving around, it's open field. So, which means crime goes up, which means they start going from town to town, committing crimes. And I mean, we just had a couple of incidents where some young people had came into the county. and was in a stolen vehicle, and one of them ended up dying running away from the police. I mean, things like this that, you know, we as providers, we want to make sure that we are impacting that front line and that we are looking at those kids that do not have that social media guidance.
David, what town? Ted, what town are you from?
I'm from Seaside, California.
And you work out of a non-profit?
Actually, I work for the city of Seaside, Youth Violence Prevention Program. Mm-hmm. And we're very essential to our community. One thing that I can say about our nonprofits is, and our community-based organizations, that they have stepped up to the plate. Mm-hmm. They have actually stepped up. And I mean, almost like these car dealers that went from making cars to masks. You know, they have changed a lot of the things that they're doing in order to conform to what the needs are. And I think that's where we are right now. We have to make sure as a people that we are conforming to what the needs are. You know, people are coming up saying that we should do this and we should do that, but people should be coming to the table with solutions. They come to the table with solutions, and then we figure out those solutions. We sit figuring out their work.
So you've seen some nonprofits change. Let me hold on to you for a second, Ted, since you've been promoted for a few minutes to honorary panelists. Any of the panelists want to comment on what Ted said? Anybody want to comment?
Ted's right on point. You know, our youth haven't slowed down, and that was that big fallacy I was talking about, and that imbalance. Law enforcement still exists out there, but that safety bubble, that safety net of us and the interventionists out on the streets, because of social distancing, have been hampered. And so our kids are at greater risk right now than ever before, I really think.
Anna, do you have thought, Tom, David, on what Ted said?
I agree with Ted. He's on point. We've seen here, and even ourselves as a health department, we've had to rethink the way we do our work with our youth advisory group, which are about 18 of them, how to engage them and then use online platforms in a way that they feel like it belongs to them. So whether it's using Spotify, so they have their own playlists, using Netflix, so they have a space where they could see something together, creating this virtual spaces, but it does not replace the human touch. Mm-hmm. And that is the challenging part. So Ted's on point, that human touch, you know, how we design the future of all this work, because COVID is here for a while, folks. I have to say that as a public health person, we have to really figure out those solutions now. So Ted, you're on point. I agree with you. What it looks like, it's through these conversations and this network that we're going to discover what it looks like. And I'm happy to engage with you and learn from you as well.
Thank you. Tom, David, any comment?
I would just say, yeah, you're spot on, Ted. And here in Sonoma County, going back to the COVID-19, what's one of the largest increases of positive cases? It's the youth. And that is really because just what Ted was describing, I think that's happening all across the state. And that makes our work that much more challenging.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, Ted, thank you for your comment very much, and good luck in your work. And
you're welcome. And one last word.
All right, man. Way to go. And vote. Thank you, Ted. That's great.
Thanks, Ted.
I'm demoting Ted back to attendee now. So listen, we had a question posted by Celeste Gutierrez. She was asking who is doing restorative circles at Watsonville PD. Chief, do you have an answer to that?
Yes, I do. So we have a couple of programs. One of our programs is our youth diversion program. So it's called our Caminos program. And it's currently it's directed at youth who commit a first offense, such as a misdemeanor. Instead of going to juvenile hall, they come back to the police department. So we cut out the middle person, and we have a caseworker that's actually hired by the police department, and they work directly with one of our nonprofits who they provide a plethora of resources to the kids, and anywhere from mental health resources to anger management to drug addiction resources. But one of the options too is if a kid or youth commits a crime, they have restorative circles with the youth, the people who are involved, and PVPSA. So I think it's a very successful way to teach our kids, hold them accountable, but keep them out of the juvenile justice system. The other thing, we also work with our Youth Violence Prevention Network here, specifically the United Way. And we partner with Everyday Democracy, which is a national organization. And they provide ideas and tools for changes in the community. And so through them, we host what we call youth dialogues. And in those restorative circles, it's really the police department coming together with youth and families that have been negatively impacted by the police. And those are held over several periods of dialogue. And so both the police department and our nonprofits that we work with use restorative circles.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Other questions, Ernesto?
Jack, we don't have other hands raised, but I did want to reach out to somebody who is on the call with us this morning. That's Pastor Tony Ortiz. He commented earlier here on Ted's comments as well, but I wanted to get from Pastor Ortiz his perspective. I know that his organization works in a number of cities around California. So Pastor Tony, I'm going to unmute you and ask you if you can have any comments related to today's conversation.
Hello.
Hello?
You're on, Tony, not your face.
Tony Jr. It's Tony Jr. My apologies.
That's okay. That's okay. I've been listening to the whole thing.
So what's your comment?
Well, just supporting what Ted said, there's a lot of innovative stuff we've been doing since the COVID started. And so not just doing trying to contact them because of the COVID, but just giving them the education on what it is and how to keep themselves safe, and to, you know, they have to learn how to live in the community just like all of us. And so we've been doing a lot of that, giving them food, giving them all the necessities to keep them safe, because like Ted said, they don't understand what's going on outside of the political circle. And so while they can't figure that out, we're just giving them all the basic love and support that they need right now, and most important, the guidance, because they really don't know, they don't understand why everything's happening. But when the protests happen, I've noticed that a lot of the young millennials have really rose up in their interests and engaging in what's going on out there as far as social justice. So I think right now we really need to keep them connected, because they've never shown this interest the way they have in the last month. And I think a lot of us as leaders need to keep them engaged in some way, shape, or form. Otherwise, we're going to lose them. And they're more interested in it more than I've ever seen.
How are you keeping, Tony, how are you keeping them engaged? And give us a note of where you are. Are you still in San Jose, or are you up in Fresno? Tell us where you are.
So we're in Santa Clara Unified School District working with youth. We're also doing juvenile reentry and throughout all of Monterey County.
Yeah.
So we have at least 30 reoffenders that are gang involved that are getting direct service from my staff. We don't have direct service in Fresno County, but I've been called personally to 2 of the rural cities to help them deal with their gang issues. For instance, we had a small town that has 5,000 people in West Fresno County that asked me to be on a Zoom meeting with the public regarding, they had about 4 shootings in 2 weeks that were of rival gangs in the area. So, you know, we still keep ourselves engaged out there to try to, you know, stick with our mission that we've had for the last 40 years.
Yep.
I'm trying to help them, you know, to keep, you know, safe streets.
Just quickly, Anthony, because we want some other stuff to come in, is how do you answer Mario's challenge and the other challenge, which is in an era when you're supposed to be distancing, how are you developing relationships with these kids who are really on the edge and who are dying for relationships? How are you doing that given the COVID? Are you?
I think we're really banking on a lot of relationships that we've had. And so when you have key relationships with key guys out there in the streets, you know, that brings some of the other ones that are unsure and not sure what to do out there. But because we have connections with their peers that have been engaged in our programs, that's probably the best way that we've been connecting with those types of clients.
Okay. All right. Well, say hello to your dad too, Anthony, will you? I hope he's okay.
He's doing fine. He was doing going into the prisons, doing ministry, but because of the COVID-19, he hasn't been able to.
I believe it. Well,
yes.
Tell him he's got to stay on his feet because we're in the same generation, so I need support. So give him a big hey from me, will you?
You'll always have our support, Jack.
Okay, good to hear your voice.
Yes,
thanks
sir.
for your commitment.
Yes, sir.
Back to you, Ernesto. Something.
Thank you, Jack. Those are all the questions that we have. So we have a little bit of time left. If you have any questions you want to pose to our participants or to our panelists, or how you want to wrap this up.
Well, I would say if any of the panelists, I haven't had a chance to look at all the comments, and there are a lot. Any of you would really wrap up thoughts about what you've heard so far from each other, any challenges that you want to present to each other? We've got a little bit of time here. We've got about 10 minutes.
Jack, if I can share some additional things that are going on in Santa Rosa?
Absolutely.
So one of the interesting challenges, some of our partners with the school district, our largest school district, Santa Rosa City School District, last week made the decision to put a pause on the school resource officer program. And that's a program that has been in Santa Rosa for the last 25 years. So again, it's that, Mario, you talk about, is there going to be change? That's never occurred, right? And so now they're reevaluating the benefits of the program. And again, this is a program, costs the schools nothing. It costs the police department, 5 positions where you have officers at each of the middle schools and the feeder school. So it's a community conversation about what are the benefits of that, and is that the best use of those resources? So I'll be very anxious to hear what those outcomes will sound like. Additionally, we have done the community engagement strategy or plan, and so tomorrow will be our first opportunity for the public to comment on that. It's also going to be our first listening session. So it's very specific with some specific outcomes tailored to hear what do we want to do? What do we want it to look like? So Jack, I know some of your questions have been, what policies or procedures are you instituting? We're still in that listening phase, giving the community opportunity to give us feedback. And that's, I think, a real big important part of it. We also established, and again, going back to your question, Mario, at least in Santa Rosa, I formed our first public safety subcommittee. We have our first meeting on Wednesday. We're talking about our police auditor. We had one before. We want to bring back him or her. What should the roles and responsibility be of that position? What about the 8 can't wait? Which ones are we going to institute? Our chief already banned the carotid hold, which is one of those that had been months ago allowable in Santa Rosa. And the last one is our after action report, because we need to evaluate the steps or the demonstrations and the police department's response to those. Was it appropriate? What were the data points that led to certain actions by our police commanders in the field? But again, it's that transparency. Let's have that community conversation, because I certainly don't have all the answers. Well, let's listen and make those appropriate changes. And the last thing that we're doing, unfortunately, due to COVID-19, our city council stays together. We have 2 years, and then we have a new election coming up in November. We didn't have an opportunity to change our goals or adjust our goals earlier this year to COVID-19. Well, our original goals were made in January of 19. A whole lot has changed since then. So again, we fit in August, another goal setting, so the council can give direction to city staff. This is where we want our energies to put in. With our last budget discussions, we've created a new EEOC and inclusion position specifically for that, because in Santa Rosa, we believe the city as an organization needs to model behaviors we want others to follow. So those are some concrete things that we're having those discussions, and it's really going to be an anxious time, or it's a great time to be hearing all this feedback and be part of this positive change. Let's be on the right side of history. Looking forward to these discussions.
Wow, that is impressive, Tom. Very, very much. Where are you in that budget discussion now? Has that just started, or is that?
No, Jack, we went through 12 hours of budget discussions. We adopted our budget last year. And one of the challenges that we had, because with this defund the police movement, literally I got probably 2,500 emails because with some of these different efforts, here's the mayor's email, boom, my inbox was inundated. One of the challenges in our community back in 2004 passed what we call Measure O, which was a quarter-cent sales tax. 70 some odd percent of the voters enacted that. And then in 2016, we went back to the voters, and the voters, over 47,000 of them, said, we want the police budget. And David can probably appreciate this regarding that last question that he answered. 32 point something percent of the city budget needs to go to police. The voters enacted that, not the electeds. So now we're in this position of some people are calling us to defund and lower that level. I'm thinking, if anything, maybe we'll reimagine what our police department looks like, but the voters have given us a very solid direction. This is how much we want going towards our public safety departments, which includes violence prevention.
Anna, has any of this touched the human services budget, either from the point of view of a closer relationship, let's say with law enforcement, because so much of their work is dealing with the homeless or with mental health cases? Has any of this come up in terms of either new partnerships, new policies, or budget changes?
So here in Long Beach, we're one of 3 local health jurisdictions. However, 98% of our budget is grant funded. We only receive a very small nominal portion of our city fund to health. So we are actively always building partnerships because we work very closely with county offices, Department of Public Health, the Department of Children and Families, Department of Mental Health, to actually sustain those relationships. And I think that's what I get out of our conversation today, that it's really the basis of these relationships at multiple levels that it's going to sustain this work. The relationships that we have with community. What is community engagement? I'll give you an example. The health department is actively always engaging community around our violence prevention work, community health work, clinical work, especially now around COVID. And one of the things that we did last week is we said, all right, well, development services is doing a lot of community engagement work around climate change, general plan. And they said, okay, so how do we coalesce? How do we come together and look at our efforts together and talk about what community engagement looks like? In my ideal world, I would have a set of promotoras that would work with community health, with the health department and development services to do tandem work that looks at delivering a public health message around violence prevention and community health. And also doubling up in terms of gaining information that will inform some of our plans. So next week, actually in 2 weeks, we're going to be meeting development services and public health to really figure out what that community engagement looks like from a prevention, early intervention point of view. But I mean, at the end of the day, I think, when Mario said you have to speak to the heart, you definitely have to have data-driven, informed decision-making, especially around budgets. So really, where is the budget impact? We're looking at what a budgetary process will look like differently now. As people talk about defunding police, it's really about reforming. What does reform look like? And how do we include a different leg, which is the public health component into that? And I think the city is really open to having those conversations. But ultimately, it's the relationships we have with community, within our city family, in our case, with our county departments, who really support a lot of our work. And then through the California Violence Prevention Network, what are those relationships at the state level that we could actually together cause change at state legislation as well? Because while local entities are the ones that we on the day-to-day are trying to figure out, our police department, how do we keep our libraries open? How do we provide public health messaging in light of COVID and social uprising? There is a substantial amount of funding that actually gets driven from state level legislation as well, especially around violence prevention.
Thank you. Let's hear a concluding sentence from each of you, if you would.
Jack, if I may just close by saying that I want to thank Tom and Dave, our chief from Watsonville and our mayor from Santa Rosa for participating. You know, sometimes as the big dogs in your towns, it's hard to engage on this discussion. And Tom, you've given great examples of some great starts. You know, my challenge to the leadership and administrations throughout our state and to all of us frontline workers is that we not waver. That as we tire, we find the energy to keep this fight going, because what I'm most concerned about is that we not lose this great momentum and these great conversations that are happening that are typical after so many tragedies. We can go rewind this a year ago, 5 years ago, and 10 years ago. What's going to make it different so that it sticks this time? And that's our challenge, is to not let this just be a few conversations with communities or a couple of novel efforts. You know, we have to sustain this. The energy's there, the need's there. And so I'm up for it. I'm going to give you my best game every day. And I just challenge everyone out there to do the same.
Thank you, Mario. Other thoughts, other closing thoughts? David?
I was just thinking about that, but so a lot of the issues that we have right now are surrounding police departments, and I have to admit, the police caused a lot of the problems we're having because of the lack of accountability, the lack of vision, and working with communities. So I think in order for us to have meaningful change, the police departments have to be part of the solution. You can't just shut them down and try to create something new. I think there's too much work to be done, and that has already been started for us to do that. So I challenge other law enforcement leaders to step up and come to the table. If that means changing the whole way we do business, starting with the academies to what we do now, then we have to do it. But law enforcement has to be a part of the solution. They can't just sit back.
Thank you, David. Tom?
First of all, I 100% agree with David. I've had that conversation with our chief, saying I want to do it with law enforcement, not to law enforcement. They need to be part of the conversation because they have a unique perspective of the whole issue. And for me, you know, my challenge, it's all about choice. Everyone has the power to choose to do what they want to engage in or what they don't want to engage in. I would just make sure that people own it, right? You can either choose to participate in this to make a positive change. You could choose to point fingers, but recognize you are making that choice. I'm choosing to be engaged, involved, moving forward. So just, again, don't be pointing fingers, look at yourself first, and are you choosing to do the things that really benefit from your community?
Anna, last word.
Really to look at the intersectional approaches to violence prevention. Violence prevention is pretty complex. We need the people on the ground to really do the interventionist work, support them. Look at trauma-informed practices. Really, what does that mean from a provider perspective? Because they're the ones on the ground. Support the staff and their own well-being. I think that's one thing that we're doing different from before, trying to figure that one out. But ultimately, again, I just want to just emphasize that relationship building is really what's going to sustain this work in the long run. Like, are we in the long haul for this, and how are we taking care of one another? You know, as simple as wear your mask. It's a way to take care of one another. Look at, you know, take that same approach into the rooms when you're having these collective conversations around how do we take care of one another for the betterment of a common vision, which means that families are safer, our communities are safer, and we're prosperous.
That's a beautiful benediction. How do we take care of one another? And I want to commend each one of you for the listening and the courage it takes to really listen. Because if you really listen, it means you are dignifying the other person and you are open to change. And that's extraordinary. There's a moral base to this. And from that, partnerships and structures will change. And I just have the sense from the four of you your extraordinary, I'll say, guts to put yourselves out there, to listen, and to say, we need you, we can't do it alone. So roles have got to change. Budgets have got to change. But what I'm getting back is this, the courage to listen, the courage to partner, the courage to change. And as you say, Anna, we got to take care of each other. So I want to thank you. You guys are wonderful. I admire you. And the country needs more of you, but we'll keep it going. And as long as my somewhat arthritic knees can carry me, you can count on me. So.